Yay Networks.
Welcome to Greg Louganis is Alive, the podcast that challenges what you think you know. I'm your host, Greg Louganis, and yes, I'm still alive. And I'm joined by my good friend and manager, Beth Zinman.
Hello, hello. So glad to be here. This is a really great topic. I feel like there's a lot of people that have been affected by bullying, whether they were bullied or doing the bullying. And then because I would imagine in that case, most people would probably look back and go, wow, I was a little asshole. Why did I do that? Like, let's unpack it, right?
But hopefully they recognize that. Oh yeah, I was a real jerk.
Yeah, I remember mine. Okay, I have to say, because we've talked about this, and I remember a girl kicking me on the playground. I was probably maybe 10 years old, and I was just sitting, probably playing jacks, which is what we did then, on the playground, playing jacks, with other friends. And next thing you know, I'm getting kicked. And there were people standing around, and I felt like, pretty embarrassed. But the funny thing is, I remember her name to this day. And forget so many things about childhood, but remember that moment. Yeah. And I will say this, Greg, because I'm familiar with your story, which I want you to share with the listeners. But I will say one thing. I don't think she was very happy. Just going to throw that in there. No. I think that's interesting. Well,
hurt people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really goes to that.
But yeah.
And I remember when I was probably 8 years old, and I remember the name Charlie, and he, just made fun of me, called me names, all that, and this one time he challenged me, and so there was supposed to be a fight at the bus stop. And so we get off the bus and he starts pushing me around. And I think what happened, because I'm not a fighter, so I think what happened is he pushed me and I was, I fell back and I probably hit him, in falling back. And then he just went off, he was like pummeling me, pushing my face into the asphalt. And while I was getting my butt kicked, the thought that ran in my head, and I have no idea where it came from, was, I'll show you. And it was like, I'll show you. I'll become the best in the world at something. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to become the best in the world, and you're going to regret it. And I also remember, too, there were other people that were around just watching. And I remember the feeling and sensation that I had, that even though Charlie was the one throwing the punches, each one of those kids who didn't stand up for me, I thought they felt the same way Charlie did. So a lot goes into the interpretation of a traumatic event like that, that you think the world is against you.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's such a fascinating thought and idea to as a kid, to have a thought like, I'll show you, I'll become the best in the world. So in a sense, it can be very motivating.
Yeah.
And, that question, well, what if the bullies didn't exist?
Yeah.
Would I be who I am?
Right. Would you? And by the way, I think you showed him.
Yeah, but you know what? And like I said, I mean, I don't know where that came from.
Yeah.
That was just so random, and I was so young.
Yeah.
So I mean, funny. Actually, that's something that we're discussing with my guest today, Arjuna Arda. And Arjuna is the author of Radical Brilliance, which explains how and why people have original ideas that can change the world. He's also an executive coach and has written 8 other books. Arjuna has been a speaker at conferences and events all over the world, including for Google and the United Nations. He's also been in the media in dozens of countries, and someone I think is pretty brilliant himself. So stay tuned. It's going to be a fascinating conversation about what if the bullies didn't exist? I mean, what if they didn't? Come right back and we'll discuss that with Arjuna Arda. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. So in making my transition as an elite athlete, competitive performer, into the real world, I needed help. So therapy was really important to keep me on that path of health and wellness and taking care of myself. Sometimes in life, we're faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. Whether you're dealing with decisions around career, relationships, or anything else, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life, so you can move forward with confidence and excitement. Trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the easier it gets. I love therapy because oftentimes your mind isn't always a kind place, and it can actually be a very dangerous place. And the thing that comes to mind is my mind can be a dangerous place. Don't go there alone. So in therapy, you have that person that you can lean on, bounce ideas off of, and get clarity to where you truly want to go. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suitable to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/GregPod today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/GREGPOD. Arjuna, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I feel really excited to dive into this amazing topic, which uncovers so much more than it seems on the surface.
Arjuna's the author of Radical Brilliance, which is a book. Arjuna, I love this book. It's one of those books that I feel like I want to study, because I need to study, because you go through the cycle of creativity, which is so impactful and understanding, and then you go into your diet and supplements, and you don't even deviate away from sex. I love that. So I want to thank you for the book.
Well, thank you for
it. Was really, really powerful.
Thank you for saying that. You just made my day.
So thank you so much for being here, Arjuna, and also bringing up this topic of bullying. Mm-hmm. Were you bullied as a child?
It's interesting you asked that. It's not something that I think about a lot or identify a lot, like, oh, I am who I am because of being bullied. But now that you ask me, yes, I did experience. It's funny, actually, that you asked this. I experienced a phase of being bullied, 2 phases of being bullied when I was a child. One at school. I don't know how it happened. It just came in a wave, and suddenly I was like unpopular, and the other kids were like, eh. And then it happened again when I went to boarding school. That was really brutal. But interestingly, it also, I wouldn't call it bullied, but I experienced the same feeling of like feeling left out, feeling not good enough, wanting to fit in. Later, when I joined a very high-profile professional organization, when I was by this time in my probably 50s, and I experienced the same wave again, and it brought all those memories back up. But I also just want to quickly slip in, over my lifetime and working sometimes with different kinds of minorities in different ways, I have realized how much I didn't have that experience, and how normal how ubiquitous it is, how many people do experience disenfranchisement or being put down for who they are. And I realized, like, wow, I actually got off lightly in a way. And that has really ramped up my compassion for this whole topic, that so much of the human experience is characterized by vying for power, by vying for who can get the top dog position over other people.
Yeah, what I find is, it's all about the meaning we give it, right? The impact that it has on us, how it's translated. Do you think that's changed over time with technology and social media? It's because I know we've talked before that things have changed with, minorities, people who are different. I mean, oftentimes that's where bullying stems from. If things are not the way you expect them to be, or somebody wears glasses, or a kid gets braces, something looks different, then oftentimes bullying happens, and it can be overt and it can be very subtle.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. There's an interesting little thing we can discover there, because I could hear you were sort of grasping for examples like braces, glass, like random things, right? But in a way, skin color, skin pigment is just as random a thing to differentiate, in a way, you could say glasses, which indicates some sort of, imperfect sight, is in a way slightly more logical than skin pigment, which means absolutely nothing, right? And then the other examples are sexual preference and gender, which are the most common, and other forms of ethnic minority, right? But as we grasp for these examples, we can see, well, we're looking, one here, one here, one here. The point is, it's ubiquitous, that this tendency that human beings have to vie for who's going to be on top and who's going to be underneath is amazing. And I actually, this is a book I'm just completing right now, which looks at this in the context of work. And, what's really interesting from I talked to Christina Koppel, who's one of the most prominent researchers in the neurology of this. And she works at Imperial College in London. And she pointed out some really interesting thing, that the tendency to adopt these pyramids of power. And I say pyramids because generally it's a smaller number of people looking for positions at the top, for a larger number of people towards the bottom of the pyramid. This is hardwired into our brains from both sides of that spectrum. In other words, it's not just that we have a kind of deviant gene that wants to be unkind to other people. There is also a deviant gene that is willing to give away power, that is willing to go along with the narrative of imbalance. Now, a really amazing, poignant example of this is India in the 1930s, and actually mostly in the 1940s, where most of the civil servants were pulled back to fight in the Second World War. So what was left was 3,000 people running the country, with a population at that time of 300 million. Now, if you think about it logically, on any day, that 300 million could have organized and thrown the British out because they were being maltreated. But 3,000 people in tweed suits managed to dominate 300 million people just because there was an underlying, unexamined, shared agreement that imbalance of power was normal, you see. And that's really bullying at a local level, which I'm sure we'll dive into a lot. The personal experience of being bullying, it's normalized. We shrug our shoulders and go, well, that's just how human beings are. And I would say that's the bigger context in which every personal experience of bullying occurs, that we go along with it as just like how human existence is. So you were asking, what if all the bullies go away, right? So really, what that question to me, what it means is, what if we evolved, which is not such a far-fetched idea. What if we evolved into realizing that playing power games is a waste of human life? That there's much more interesting things to do with our lives together than vying for power.
Arjuna, do you think it's about power, or do you think it's about control?
How much of a difference is there between? I mean, it seems if you have control, you have power, and if you want power, you need control. But let's explore that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why that just came to mind with what you were sharing with the whole power thing. And yeah, that's my question. What is the difference between power and control?
Well, definitely. I mean, it seems to me the very fact that we're discussing this means that they're bedfellows. They certainly live alongside each other quite closely. So, yeah, I think these kind of questions, they may seem academic, and they may seem philosophical or far, but these are the questions. These are the kind of pivotal questions. Coming to really reflect upon and understand these kind of questions are actually what can pivot our world. And we're talking today about bullying, and I'm assuming with a shared assumption that it's kind of not cool, right? We're talking about bullying as one of those things that we wish would stop happening, right? And we could come up with a long list of things, but right. Somehow it's an interesting time to be alive because our world has, I don't know if we could say evolved or just constantly changed to the point where we are now faced with so many things like that seem untenable, that we've really come to a point in many ways where we're either going to make a huge leap of evolution in what we think of as normal human behavior, or we're going to perish. We're going to actually destroy each other. And you can see with political events recently, we've come closer and closer to that again, coming back into focus as a real possibility, that our habits of what we think of as normal ways to behave actually are starting to jeopardize our survival.
Yeah, and also, I mean, technology has had an incredible impact.
Yeah.
On that it used to be you had to be the bullying. It happened. You had physical contact.
Yeah, exactly.
Now it's you can go on social media.
Yeah,
and you have access to that, which can be used as a tool for good.
Yeah,
but also a tool that can injure.
Absolutely, I think that's the critical point. That when we pivot to talking about technology, it's a neutral tool. Right. Technology is neither malevolent nor benevolent, right, because it's just technology. You can say anything you want on a TikTok video or Instagram or whatever. So, but yes, the effect really, I would suggest that technology has had on the issue we're discussing is it's removed the line of sight. You see, now, if you go back to high school or middle school or whatever, when we were young, the bullying happened between people who had line of sight. So, and if you watch high school movies, like Mean Girls, or I forget all the different movies, but there are all these movies about that demonstrate people being mean to each other. Generally, the play is one character is the bully, right? This is the kind of the usual play out. One character is the bully, and generally in the movie, and I think fairly accurately, we discover that character, if you dig down, has issues. They've probably got issues at home. They're probably afraid and not feeling good about themselves. So that's where we start to discover that everybody's a loser in this game, And then you've got the bullied, right? Who is, at least initially, has sand kicked in their face, or is not invited to the party, or just like is having a bad time. But then because of this issue of line of sight, you've got a lot of people aware of what's going on, kind of saying nothing, like not wanting to stand up to the bully and not wanting to too overtly side with the bullied. But eventually the story turns, and the majority of people side with the bullied, and the bully gets pushed out. All of that scenario, which is, I've just recounted to you the plot line of at least 100
exactly
100 movies.
Yeah, I was like, I've seen that movie, right?
Yeah. I mean, probably, if you just flip through, if you go to the kind of, I don't know what you call it, the sort of comedy drama section of Amazon, you'll find, or if you just go to like high school movies, like most of them have that kind of plot, right?
Yeah.
So the plot is ubiquitous, but what was common to that storyline before social media? And remember, when we say before social media, what are we talking about? It's really the smartphone that put this in our face all the time, right? So there was social media before the smartphone, but you had a computer that you would open and close. It's having one of these things, a smartphone in your hand, pretty much all the time, buzzing at you, giving you notifications, which we somehow don't have the strength of mind to switch off. That you've got something in your face constantly reminding you of this game, and really that is, It since 2007, the first iPhone came out in 2007. It didn't really get mass adoption until about 2010. So we're talking about the last, it's 12 years that we've seen this huge shift in the way we live together, and it's removed the line of sight. You see, so and this is the whole thing we talk about canceling, which is a form of bullying because it means really putting somebody on trial and banishing them to Siberia before you've even heard their side of the story, right? And in many cases that is probably ends up being somewhat legitimate. I mean, the benefit of that is you get to see a rogue cop or something being really mean, and who would have got away with it before, but now that rogue cop is called out. Or Harvey Weinstein, for example, it took social media and it took mass movements to out somebody who was behaving badly and stop them from being in that position again. But frequently that happens in an unfair way. It happens with innocent people, and that's where removing the line of sight makes this tendency towards bullying happen on such a bigger scale.
Yeah, I mean, because there's a lack of responsibility.
Yeah,
when you can hide behind a screen, hide behind a handle, then you have that anonymity, that barrier.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you don't have to take responsibility for, what's out there.
Right. So in a way that hasn't, in my opinion, the advent of technology, of handheld technology, of technology that's always with you from the minute you wake up in the minute. It's for many people, it's the first thing they, you ask people, a lot of people say the first thing they do in the morning. I know this because I coach people, and I help them get into a good morning routine. I ask, what is the first thing you do in the morning? Look at the phone. Literally go from sleep to open your eyes, and within a minute, your phone is in your face. And for many people, yeah, good.
And it's usually conflict. Yeah. It's either somebody wants something from you, or there's conflict and something that, that can really be disruptive of your day, just waking up and you feel really good, and then all of a sudden, I have to do this, and you have a laundry list.
Well, it depends a bit on the platform. I mean, certainly, if you're looking at the news today, it's conflict. If the first app you go to is Google News or whatever, it's going to be conflict. But if you go to, we were talking specifically about social media. So if it's like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc., then actually you're going to see a very subtle game of who's better, who's more popular, and it's done with such subtlety and art and persuasive power, particularly when it's paid ads, and big companies putting spokespeople in front of an audience, that you hardly notice it. It just looks cool and great. And here's somebody in front of the swimming pool, and looking like they're having a great time. I've actually coached some people who have, massive Instagram followers in the millions. And I get to see sometimes on a particular day, they talk to me. I get to hear what's actually going on in their lives and how, frustrated they are with something. And then I look at what's on their Instagram. It's like, what?
It's a totally different picture.
Yeah.
It's a totally different picture that they can, they can live this shadow life.
So that is what we introduce ourselves to very often first thing in the morning. And I think particularly when we talk about bullying, we're probably concerned about the experience of middle school and high schoolers, right? Because that's where, for a lot of people, that's where bullying has such a strong impact. So probably for someone under 18, they're going to go to, I say Instagram and TikTok. There's probably things I haven't heard of yet that are trending now that I don't even know about. But a lot of people are going to go to the place where you learn about what's cool and what's not cool, and that you learn that from the outside, right. And often from people who you have no relationship with at all, who are on the other side of the planet.
I guess also in my experience, because when you're in junior high, you're very impressionable, and you think that if you're bullied, then you have certain beliefs, and then, but I know for myself, as I grew older, I understood that a lot of the beliefs that I believed were just thoughts other people had of me, and that weren't true. That we kind of, I've evolved to utilize the bullying in a positive way of motivation, and learned resiliency from that. But one thing I learned was that that rage was not sustainable.
Yeah.
And so that shift of turning, because I remember writing an article about, I almost want to thank the bullies in my life for allowing me to become who I am. That was the motivation, but the sustainable portion was creativity.
Yeah. So, it's really interesting what you're pointing to, that the same stimulus of being bullied could cause collapse, isolation, depression, and it could also become a motivator to becoming the best version of yourself. I think that's a fantastic insight, and it's actually this is again what I work with. I work with people actually not so much necessarily who want to succeed, but people who want to make the greatest possible difference. People who maybe they have succeeded and they really want to be instrumental in pivoting the world in an obviously more loving, compassionate, sustainable direction. And absolutely, adversity can be either an opportunity to collapse or to expand beyond your wildest dreams. And honestly, I don't know if anybody has come up with a really good explanation for why that pivots one way or the other. You can literally have... Well, yeah, go ahead.
That was what I was going to ask you. I mean, how do you coach somebody to change the meaning, possibly, or and like a lot of times we think of those really hurtful scars, there seem to always be there, but is there true healing?
Yeah.
In that space, or is that just a recognition? It's like, oh, I recognize that.
Got it. Yeah. So I think, from my perspective, and I'm just, who am I? Just some random dude you picked up for your podcast. But from my perspective, I definitely perceive radically different dimensions to who we are, right? And I'm just going to, we could spend days just unpacking that. But I'm just going to briefly, if I may, just mention a few of those dimensions, because the way that we look at these questions that you're bringing up is going to be completely different according to which dimension you identify with, right? So, and it's not like you are one or the other. These dimensions are all available, right? So all the time. So one dimension would be, I would call it like normal humdrum, what I would call exogenously influenced identity. That means influence from the outside. So that's the way that we are pressured to conform to, well, we talked about social media, but in lots of ways that we're pressured to conform to religious ideology, to family values, etc. So you're not particularly accessing anything within yourself. You're just fitting into the way Leonard Cohen put it was in My Secret Life. He says, I bite my lip. I buy what I'm told. Okay, I buy what I'm told. From the latest hit to the wisdom of old. But I'm always alone and my heart is like ice and it's crowded and cold in my secret life. So that's that top level where you're buying what you're told, you're agreeing with the collective beliefs, you're just going along with the herd, but you're absolutely disconnected from yourself and from your values. So then there's another level, which is where you're more connected to your emotions, to your inner life, but it's still conditioned. So you're more connected now. For example, that's where you might become aware of your wounding, of your trauma, of your pain. So now you're kind of doing inner work, right? Mm-hmm. Now we're going to get a little woo. So I know woo has a bad rap, so I'm going to be cautious with how much I play the woo. But so now we can go a little deeper than that, which is truly endogenous values. And in order to get in touch with truly endogenous values, we have to go woo. So that means people connect with truly endogenous values when they have a near-death experience, right? So they kind of biologically die. This is well documented. There's a good Netflix series on this, but people biologically die for like a minute or longer, and they experience a kind of leaving the body. And then the main thing people report on in a near-death experience is, oh my God, I had my ladder leaning against completely the wrong wall. I was chasing after money and fame and all these things, and it wasn't what was important to me, right? Now, you can get in touch with this in lots of ways, these kind of deeply endogenous values, like really why you came here, okay? So, and of course, that opens up a lot of questions. What do you mean by you? And who were you before your father met your mother? These are all like vague questions, but you can get there. There are ways to get there. You can do a kind of regression back through phases of your life, and then you just catapult back to before you were born. You can also like set up in imagination, you can set up the conditions of your deathbed. So there are ways to actually disengage from the way that you're plugged into all of this theater and remember what's truly, truly important to you as a quote soul. And I don't have a precise definition for what that means, but we all seem to have an instinct that there's something deeper than all of the condition. And then there's another level, another dimension, which is the kind of one with everything, sort of thing, right? Which is where you no longer exist as a separate entity. So, and that's the domain of mysticism. That's what Eckhart Tolle talks about, right? So there are these dimensions, right? So these questions that you're raising are going to be, I think the question about why you pivot one way or another, you could have people in the same family. And I've coached people who catapulted to incredible excellence and incredible contribution out of really, really difficult circumstances, like incredibly difficult circumstances, like, being born in the inner city with heroin addicted parents, and they just knocked it out of the ballpark, but their siblings didn't. Right. So the same conditioning caused one person to turn that into gold and another person not. And honestly, I don't find personally any explanation for how that pivot works until we get back to who you are at the deepest level, because that's that gives you, and we do have these words, these shared words of like purpose and mission, and values. We have these words, even if we may not agree exactly what they mean, we do have an instinct that there is something like your innermost, which is where all the meaning lies, and it's where love comes from, and it's where you know what to do, just beyond what anyone tells you. So I think that is so, when we talk about the effect of social media, that is what's get anesthetized, right? When you're on apps all the time, that is primarily what we get cut off from, is connection with that deepest core. You rediscover it in nature. You rediscover it in deep, meaningful connections like we've had, actually, where you get into some real conversations. You reconnect with it, actually, if you don't mind me saying so, on psychedelics. That's I think why there's a huge resurgence of popularity in psychedelics, because at least for a few hours it reconnects you with what is absolutely meaningful to you. Now, when we get back there, when we get back to that dimension of yourself where you are fully connected with what is true for you without external influence, we're going to find out, why do we pivot into collapse through certain stimulus, and why do we pivot into incredible inspiration? But equally, we're going to discover, just like we talked about in the plot of the movie, of the bullying movie, we're going to discover in the bullying game, in the play for power, everybody loses, everybody's wounded. There is no winner in that game, but you need to be able to to track all the way back to your innermost values to remember what is truly a good way to live on the planet.
That's a question I've posed to myself is, people ask, well, what does Greg want? And it's like, oh my God, I'm not sure. What and what does that mean? Also, I did do ayahuasca. And my experience was I was trying to come up with the name of an Australian musical instrument. And it was a didgeridoo, but I couldn't think of it. I was kazoo. And it didn't come to me. And I think the realization that I came away from is that we label things, and as soon as we label things, there's the labels that we give things. What we're labeling is so much more.
Yeah.
So much more, because a didgeridoo, as soon as you start playing it, it becomes something other.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only way I can describe it. And so it just made me smile thinking, oh my God, I'm not just Greg.
Yeah.
There's so much more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's amazing. Yeah. That the word didgeridoo, it's like a word, but if you took away the word, as you did, you couldn't remember the word, you can still hear the sound of the instrument in your head, right? You can still remember the sound. But that sound exists without the word didgeridoo. And equally, the great, magnificent mystery who I am having the privilege to meet right now, the great, unfathomable mystery out of which the words are arising, is so much more than the word Greg or anything that the word Greg is associated with. Like Greg is a word around which certain things have been glued, like diver, gold medal, congratulations, by the way, twice,
Thank you.
LGBTQ activist, etc. You've got certain attributes. I don't know if I said those letters correctly, but but
LGBTQAI plus.
Okay.
They keep adding on, and more to learn.
Yeah. So you've got various attributes which can be put into a bag called Greg. But I would suggest that what I am actually meeting here is actually beyond that bag of Greg. It's like Greg is the vehicle, right? Greg is the vehicle which is used to navigate this world of seemingly separate people. But what I'm talking to is a mystery, and that's what you've just pointed to. That when you did this journey, you could connect with the vibration of this instrument, but the name, you couldn't remember the name, probably because the name didn't matter anymore. Now, that's where we need to go, you see, because if we can learn, and this is not just a hypothetical, theoretical thing we're saying now, this is happening big time in lots of ways. If we can learn to live there, with or without substances, if we can learn to live in mystery, and actually, instead of looking across the breakfast table and going, good morning, and, that's like my partner, my wife, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my whatever, instead of like, oh, good morning, oh, that's to actually go, whoa, I have no idea who that is, right? I've got a few memories, but that is like a vast mystery right there, If we can learn to live in that not knowing, in that capacity for awe and mystery, I would suggest that is what's underneath our conversation about bullying, right? Because then you're not going to see somebody as a type of person. Oh, that's a brown person, or oh, that's a gay person, or oh, that's a whatever. You're not going to look at somebody as like a label, which is what you're bullying the label based on ideology. But if you actually start to see things as mysterious, it would be interesting. I doubt there's I doubt there's any research on this, but maybe there will be someday. I'd like to see the statistics on the occurrence of bullying in people while under the influence of psychedelics? I would say it's pretty much zero.
Probably
right?
zero.
Yeah, right. So, and that doesn't mean I'm not a great proponent for everybody doing drugs all the time, but it does suggest that when you go into a more expansive state, these behaviors are no longer normal, you see. So could we learn together to live in a more expansive state in ordinary interactions, and to live more in the mysterious, and to realize that knowing things is kind of for losers. It's the not knowing where all the juice is, right? Yeah.
Right. And because I remember we touched on this in previous conversations. It's just like if it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah. It's not just okay, it's absolutely radically brilliant to say, I don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That it's not falling in the line of judgment. And, I know like what you were saying is where bullying lives.
Yeah.
That we can live outside of that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, bullying is our local experience. Mm-hmm. You and I have shared memory of bullying. I don't know about you, but to be honest, I've got memories of being bullied. If I wouldn't take me long, give me 2 or 3 minutes, I could probably come up with memories of being a bully as well, because it's a game, it's a game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would suggest, that bullying is the localized experience of something much bigger.
Yeah.
Which is the way that we substitute power and control, which are not nourishing ultimately to anybody, for connection and love.
Yeah, I mean, it's like making that shift, where the bullies, on that physical plane that you were discussing, and moving it to another plane where it's not about the power. But I think I do have to say, like if there's, young kids out there who are being bullied, then, just it oftentimes it is the meaning that you give things, the meaning that you give something, that there is, you may have the bully and the victim, but the bully is a victim in themselves, and that's moving on the physical plane, that we're getting a grips of, not to advocate for bullying, but just an awareness and understanding.
If you are in junior high or whatever, feeling bullied, or if you have a child who is in junior high feeling bullied, I would suggest whoever can expand the conversation beyond the polarity is going to actually have the real power, right? The real power, not the vying for control, but the real relaxed power. Whoever can see it see the situation in the most expansive way is actually going to have not the kind of control we fight for, but real creative control of the situation, right? So, for example, we've talked about a bully and bullied. For somebody to be bullied, you need a bully, right? And you just mentioned, like, the elephant in the room, which is usually not mentioned, is what must someone be experiencing inside themselves to choose to divert their energy in that way? And we know by now, this is what you don't know when you're in junior high, but you find out later, is bullies are usually hurting. They usually have an unsatisfactory home life. They're not feeling loved for who they are. They're under pressure, etc. Right? So if you remain in the role you've been allocated in this movie of I'm bullied, I'm the underdog, they're being mean to me, you don't have much creative control and you just feel horrible, right? Pushing back, okay, I'm going to bully you, I'm going to get revenge. That's not satisfying either. That's actually now to hurt people participating. But whoever can expand the conversation, just simply we mentioned, in the high school movie, it's often there's the bully, there's the bullied, and then there's everybody else, which makes up most of the population, right? So if the bullied can initiate a conversation like, I wonder what someone must be experiencing to want to exert power over another person during our, school years, when there's dating and flirting and fun to be had. I wonder what somebody's experience must be to want to use their school years to just inflict pain on somebody else. If you just open that conversation, whoever opens the conversation in that way has not control over somebody, but creative control, creative authority. And that also is something we can do as parents. It's like, I remember my younger son, there was some fight in the schoolyard between him and another boy. And we were all called in, right, for some kind of mediation. So there was the other boy, his mother, and for what I understand, she was scared, blah, blah, blah. So most of the conversation there was about who initiated the fight. In other words, it was vying for the victim position. There was a competition for the victim position. Who is the perpetrator here? So we can, and of course, she was wanting her son to have the victim position, right? So I just did what I know to do well. I expanded the conversation. I said, well, here we are vying for the victim position, right? I wonder what the outcome of that will be, or we could ask ourselves, what is the context? What is the context where these two kids are just part of a playground? What is the context which allowed this to become confrontational? What might it be? What might be going on in each of them, or what might be the unsaid things between the two of them that has allowed this to escalate? And when we explored it, we discovered that they both, so I just said, would you allow me to, because I was already working with people, at the time. So I said, would you allow me to just ask a few questions? So I asked, do you have any resentments to this other kid? Yeah. Do you have any other things you're upset about? And they built up a lot of resentments. They cleared all that up. They cleared up misunderstanding, and that made the problem go away. So whoever can expand the conversation beyond who's going to be the victim and who's the bully and who's the victim and who's going to win the war. Basically, in pretty much every war, everybody loses, right? And we're seeing that played out on the global scale right now. The war that is being enacted right now in Ukraine, there are no conceivable winners in that. Ultimately, if you play it out to the ultimate extreme, everybody's going to go down together, you see. So that's in our face, realizing vying for power, vying for control, vying for or vying to play the victim position. Nobody wins in any of those games. But when we can expand and have conversations, and there's no reason why somebody in high school or junior high, with a little help and support, it's absolutely possible to initiate those conversations. And I would suggest, most of us looking back on being bullied, at the time we thought, how can I get revenge? How can I get control? But looking back, our adult selves would probably say, don't even worry about that. Just remember what's important to you and think about what do you want to create. And then just tune out the distraction that's in the way of what you want to create in your life. Right.
And what comes to my mind when you were saying that is you can only be hurt if you give the other person permission to hurt you.
Yeah, we have to be, of course. I mean, I can just imagining when someone's listening to this, we have to be really careful with these,
Right. Yeah.
I think probably as we're speaking right now, the conflict's going on in Ukraine. So probably saying that to Ukrainians, that wouldn't go down very well. But
no.
But it's true. It's true that
I'm thinking on a personal level rather than
on a personal level. Yeah, on a personal level, I agree with you. The only thing is letting that be our primary thought. First of all, I think it can be quite difficult to see that sometimes. Like, how am I actually creating this or giving permission? So I agree that what you're saying is true. I think the actual way out of this is to sort of shift from the whole dynamic into the question, what do I want to create for myself and for the other person? Now, if you think about it, somebody being bullied, initially they may, when they're caught in the power struggle, they may feel like, I want to hurt this person. I want to ostracize this person. I want to punish this person. But ultimately you don't want that, right? Because you don't want to punish somebody in high school who you're then going to have to go to class with every day and who's resentful. You don't want that. What you actually want is everybody to get along. That will allow you to enjoy your life and be creative. And as I said, to flirt and go on dates and skateboard and, do all the things that are fun about being young, right? Yeah. So really, you don't really want conflict anywhere. Ultimately, you don't want anyone to have power over you, nor do you want to have power over anybody else, because it's going to take away from the things you really want to create.
Right. And that's what life's all about, is creation.
Yeah.
We're creators.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, we've gone way out there about bullying, just around bullying. And, what you brought up as far as that power struggle and, the conflict of that, and navigating and moving through the world. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, in some ways, I'm grateful for the experience, but at the same time, I had to get through that experience to get to the side of creation. The younger that we hit people with these types of exercises, because I learned visualization when I was 3 years old, and so your imagination is really active, and the earlier we can hit these kids with these thought processes and games, I like to think of them as games, that we can play with ourselves and, and bring awareness, it's never too early, right, to have those conversations, have those exercises, those games that you can play.
Yeah.
Now, I really appreciate you being here, and
thank you for inviting me.
Tell people how they can get Radical Brilliance and where they can follow or keep in touch with you and what you do, because I find everything that you're doing so fascinating.
Okay, well, thanks. So there's a website. You got a pen?
Yep.
Okay, write this down. AMAZON. That's so you can get my book.
Oh. Radical Brilliance.
Yeah. So
Amazon.
Yeah. So it's on Amazon. I know some people have some misgivings about Amazon's social structure, Amazon's financial structure, but it's on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes and Noble and stuff, but I think a lot of people just buy books on Amazon. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Arjuna. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate your time, your energy, your heart, your brain. I'm in love with your brain.
Well, thank you. Thank you for my brain says thank you. My brain is blushing right now. So thank you for creating this amazing space for these conversations to happen. That's the whole thing. I almost every Saturday, I am witness to the most inspiring, brilliant conversations imaginable in my dining room. Like every Saturday, I'm blown away by what's happening in my dining room. But I had to invite the people for dinner in order for that to happen. Thank you for creating the space and inviting the conversation, because that's, in my opinion, if you want to keep the world the way that it has been, you just learn things from people who know how to do things. If you want to actually create a new world, you have to open conversations. We've got to open completely open-ended conversations where we can question the most deeply entrenched assumptions and ask ourselves, how do we really want to live? Like, is this it? Or do we really want to just spend our lives playing these petty games where we trample all over each other? Is this it? Do you really want to amass so much more money than you know what to do with while other people don't have enough? Is this really what you want? Because we could be playing a much more fun game. But we have to have conversations to be able to imagine together what our hearts are really calling for.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Greg Louganis is Alive. And if you liked this episode, please share this with someone you love. And don't forget to subscribe. so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, namaste.
Yay Networks.